They say her screams echoed across the fjords for days, not because of fear, but because of vengeance. When the villagers found the remains of King Harold's longhouse, there was nothing left but charred beams, melted iron, and a crown fused to a scorched skull. The queen was gone. So were 20 men. Some said it was raiders. Others whispered it was a curse. But those who knew her, truly knew her, never doubted. They remembered the way she walked after the trial. Head high, hands trembling, her eyes fixed on something far away, something burning. They say she spoke to no one for 13 nights. Then one morning, before the sun touched the frost, she vanished into the woods. She returned a month later, dressed in black wolf furs, carrying nothing but a torch and a name on her lips, Einar. What happened next would become a warning carved into stone, buried beneath centuries of snow, and feared in songs never sung. You're about to hear the forgotten medieval Viking tale of a queen betrayed, a fire born of fury, and the night she burned a kingdom alive. The year was 891. The air in northern Vestfold was sharper than blades, and the fjords, frozen in silence, reflected the sky like black glass. Winter in Viking lands was more than cold. It was a test. Those who survived the snowstorms, hunger, and God's silence carried with them a respect for death and fire. In the village of Skarlvik, nestled between pine-cloaked cliffs and wind-lashed shores, survival meant obedience. Not just to jarls and kings, but to customs older than names. Here, a man's worth was weighed by his blade, a woman's by her bloodline, and justice was carved into bone. The villagers believed in the old gods still. Odin watched from the crows. Freya walked the snow as a pale woman with no shadow. Loki's laughter was heard in the cracking of ice at dawn. Magic was real, not like spells and tales, but in omens, dreams, and the color of the sky before someone died. Fire was sacred. It cleansed. It judged. To be burned alive was rare, but when it happened, it was the gods' verdict. No one questioned it. Except one. King Harald Eiriksson, ruler of Skarlvik, was a man of war. He rose to power not by birth, but by spilling blood. His wife, Queen Astrid, was not of noble descent. She came from the eastern woodlands, daughter of a healer and a horse thief. Many disapproved of their union, especially Jarl Einar, Harald's war brother and blood-sworn ally. But Harald loved her fiercely, and for a time that was enough, until the summer plague came. Children died first, then the weak. Then Harald himself fell ill. The village cried witchcraft, and all fingers pointed to the woman who brewed herbs in silence, who walked under moonlight, and whose eyes never flinched at death. Astrid. She was dragged before the Thing, Skarlvik's open-air court, bound in iron, accused by trembling voices and smiling men. But before she could speak, Harald rose from his bed, still fevered, and shouted one name, Einar. It was the last word he ever said. And the last day Astrid was queen. Astrid was born beneath trees so thick the sun forgot to shine. Her mother was known in whispers as the one with smoke in her hands, a healer, a woman of roots and silence. Her father, a man without a name, had been hanged for stealing a jarl's prized stallion before Astrid's first winter. She grew up far from halls of gold and iron. Her world was pine needles, firelight, and stories carried in the breath of the old ones. She learned to feel a storm before it came, to taste the soil and know what was dying, and to stand still when men yelled, not from fear but from a knowing deeper than fear. When she came of age, she was sent to the markets of Vestfold to trade herbs and furs. That was where Harald saw her. Not as a healer, not as a peasant, as something else, something unspoken. He was a warrior back then, not yet crowned, not yet broken by politics. He married her within a moon cycle. The nobles roared in disapproval. Astrid never smiled in court, never danced, never begged. She was not the queen they wanted, but she was the one he chose. She bore him no sons. Whispers followed her like wolves. Still she stood beside Harald when war came. When his men fell, she stitched their wounds. When the land froze, she fed the poor from her own stores. She knew each face in the village, even those who spat near her feet. And she remembered every one. But love cannot protect you when fear is louder. When the plague spread and the sky turned gray, it wasn't a healer the people needed, it was a scapegoat. Astrid said nothing when they bound her hands. Said nothing when they shaved her hair before the trial. She only looked at Harold, sick and dying, and waited for him to speak. He did. He said Einar. And with that name, everything changed. The queen was not executed. Not yet. But her title was stripped, her chambers taken. She was locked in the northern storehouse, where animals were once kept during blizzards. For 13 days she said nothing. But on the 14th, when the guard opened the door, she was gone. The morning after Astrid vanished, Skarlvik woke to frost so thick it silenced footsteps. The villagers murmured prayers to Odin, fearing a curse, a punishment, an omen. But the thing declared her escape a blessing. The gods had spared them the sin of killing a witch. Let her rot in the woods, they said. Let the wolves finish what justice began. But wolves stayed away from where she had gone. Far beyond the village's reach, deep in the snow-laden forest, Astrid moved like a shadow. She did not sleep. She barely ate. What she did do was remember. She remembered the Jarl who had grinned when her braids were cut. The old woman who clutched her child tighter when Astrid passed. The priest who called her a pale-eyed serpent under his breath. But more than that, she remembered Einar. Jarl Einar. Harold's closest friend. The man who shared his blood oath and mead horn. The man who stood silent when the accusations flew. The one whose voice rose first when Harold collapsed. The one who stepped forward, hands raised, and said, "Let the gods decide. Let the fire judge her." He didn't even look at her when the guards dragged her away. He didn't need to. His plan had already begun. 3 days after Astrid fled, Einar moved into the king's longhouse. He claimed it was to stabilize the people. The village, numb and shaken, accepted his presence. After all, the plague had stolen their king and the queen was now a ghost. Einar wasted no time. The throne was never officially his, but his name echoed louder in the hall than Harold's ever had. He promised meat for winter, stronger defenses, and a temple to the gods. People clapped. They drank. They forgot. But Astrid had not. In the forest, she followed the old tracks of her mother. Past the bone trees, across the Wolfstone Ridge, she found the cave, hidden beneath a fallen pine, veiled in moss and memory. Inside, it smelled of fire and mold and something older than time. She lit no flame. She did not need one. For 13 nights, she remained there, scratching names into the stone with a shard of bone. Einar's was the first. Then the others. Each night, she whispered to the air, "I'm not asking for mercy. Only fire." And on the 14th day she returned. She wore black wolf furs over her torn dress. Her hair had grown uneven, falling in clumps. Her hands were cracked, smeared with ash and dried sap. She did not knock at the village gate. She did not wait. She walked straight toward the longhouse. No one stopped her. No one dared. Because in her eyes, they saw something older than rage. They saw prophecy. That night, the village slept lightly. Dreams twisted into shadows. Dogs howled, then fell silent. The air, already frozen, felt wrong, thicker, heavier, like breathing through grief. And then smoke. It rose slowly at first, curling from the thatched edges of the longhouse roof like black ribbons. By the time the first screams rang out, it was already too late. The doors had been barred from the outside. Iron spikes driven through the hinges. The only exit, the main entryway, was engulfed in flame. Inside, 20 men had gathered. Warriors, elders, Einar himself. They had been drinking mead, celebrating the new reign, mocking the old queen in songs half forgotten by dawn. Some were asleep. Others too drunk to stand. None made it out. The fire roared with purpose. Not wild like raiders' torches. Not accidental like hearth embers. It was precise. It moved in patterns. Some swore later the flames curled like snakes, like runes on flesh, licking specific names from the hall. And through the heat, a voice. You asked the gods for judgment. Tonight, they speak through me. The villagers ran to the longhouse but stopped short. Not because of the blaze, though it was monstrous, but because Astrid stood before it. So silent. She held no weapon. Only a torch, long extinguished, and a pouch of bloodroot tied to her wrist. They say her eyes were white in the firelight. Not from blindness. From something else. From purpose. Einar had laughed once at her mother's cave, calling it a witch's den for cowards. He died beneath its echo, his voice caught mid-scream, choking on smoke and pride. But the fire was not the end. In the days that followed, strange things happened. The village well turned red for 3 mornings. Goats birthed stillborn kids with open eyes. Every tree around the burned longhouse died, all at once, their bark blackened from the inside. The people panicked. They blamed Astrid. But no one moved against her. Because she didn't stay. The night after the fire, she walked back into the forest, barefoot, leaving behind only a handful of ash smeared into the longhouse steps. And a warning carved into the door frame, burned into the wood. What fire takes, it remembers. Weeks passed. Skarlvik fell quiet. Harvests failed. Wolves came closer. The villagers began whispering prayers again, not to Odin, not to Thor. To her. She is the fire. She is the judgment. She is the price of forgetting. Some called her a goddess. Others a curse. But those who knew her story, who remembered the girl from the woodlands, the silent queen who stitched wounds and fed the poor, they saw something else entirely. A woman who was broken. Then buried. Then reborn in flame. Some say she made a pact in that cave. That the earth itself gave her its fury in exchange for silence. Others believe the rage was hers alone, pure, human, and ancient. Whatever the truth, the legend remained. Passed from tongue to tongue in whispers and firelight. And far from the village, deep in the forest, if you listen closely under the snow, you can still hear the crackle of flames. But legends don't stay quiet forever. 2 moons after the fire, a band of warriors from the southern coast arrived in Skarlvik. They were Harald's cousins, exiled years before in a bitter feud over gold and goats. Word of Einar's death had traveled faster than crows. They came not to mourn but to claim what they believed was owed. Land, titles, vengeance. Their leader, Bjorn Halfhand, stood 6.5 feet tall, his sword carved from whale bone and tempered in volcanic rock. He demanded to know who ruled now. The villagers offered no answer. They only looked toward the trees. Bjorn scoffed. A village ruled by ghosts? He laughed. Then we will burn the rest of it down and salt the ground. That night, 20 men set torches to the fields. The barns caught first. The smoke rolled over Skarlvik again, just as it had on the night Astrid took back her fire. The villagers did not fight. They had nothing left to lose. But before dawn, as the first hut collapsed in flame, something stirred at the forest's edge. A figure stepped out, slower now, older, the wolf furs heavy with snow. Her hair longer, streaked with gray. But her eyes? Unchanged. The same hollow quiet. The same silence that had once chilled Einar's blood. Astrid. She carried no blade. Only a bowl of water darkened with ash, and a single rune carved into her palm. Bjorn laughed again. Is this the witch they fear? But then his horse bucked wildly. The air shifted, a sudden gust, dry and sharp like sparks. The flames on the huts bent backward, away from the village, and toward the warriors. Then the ash bowl shattered. And everything stopped. It wasn't magic, not in the way Southerners believed. No lightning, no dragons. Just silence. Then smoke. Then screams. The flames erupted upward, splitting like a crown of fire around the warriors' camp. One man's armor turned red-hot in seconds. Another's face melted before he could draw breath. Bjorn ran. He made it to the river, frost biting his lungs, face scorched, screaming for mercy. And Astrid followed, not fast, not with fury, but with the patience of someone who had already died once. At the river's edge he fell to his knees. "Please," he whispered. "I'm not the one who hurt you." And Astrid said, "That's the only true thing you've spoken." Then she knelt and pressed her palm, bleeding, burning, against his forehead. No knife, no sword, just a whisper. "The fire remembers." He drowned, not in water, in fear. When the sun rose, the fields had burned away, but the village still stood, not untouched, not whole, but alive. Astrid stood at the center of the ash, surrounded by blackened earth and silent faces. No one approached her. No one dared crown her. But no one ever questioned her place again. She walked to the remnants of the longhouse, where the wood still whispered secrets in smoke, and sat upon the stones where the throne had once stood. And there she remained, not as queen, not as witch, not as goddess, but as judgment itself. Years passed. Skarlvik never crowned another ruler. The longhouse was never rebuilt. The fields recovered slowly, but the people changed. They no longer told stories of Harold the warrior or Einar the jarl. They whispered of her, the queen of fire, the widow of ash. Children were warned not to lie, not because of gods or spirits, but because the fire listens. No one dared cut down the trees near the cave. No one dared rebuild too close to the burned earth. Not out of fear, out of respect. Astrid never spoke in public again. She walked among the people sometimes, offering no words, only presence. Her silence became sacred. Her eyes, unreadable. She had no need to punish. The village punished itself. When she died, there was no body. Just footprints in the snow leading back into the forest. And a circle of stones left at the foot of the longhouse ruins, still warm to the touch. Some said she finally found peace. Others believed she had become something else entirely. Not a ghost, not a legend, but a truth. That pain, when buried deep enough, becomes prophecy. That silence, when held long enough, becomes fire. And that some queens don't wear crowns. They burn them. Was Astrid a hero? Or just a woman broken so deeply the only language left was fire? Some say she was justice, a reckoning carved from silence and betrayal. Others say she lost herself in vengeance, that she became what she hated. But maybe she became what the world made her. And what about Einar? Was he truly the villain, or just another man shaped by fear and hunger for power? The line between victim and monster in the medieval world was often no thicker than ash. What's certain is this: Astrid's story was buried, not forgotten. It lived in the blackened beams of the longhouse, in the warnings mothers whispered to daughters, and in every spark that rose from a hearth on winter nights. You've just heard one such story. And there are more. Much more. If this tale haunted you, if it made you wonder what you do when the fire comes, then stay. There are other queens, other betrayals, other nights that burned the world down. Subscribe for more forgotten Viking tales, told in firelight and silence.